black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
I am about to sign into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I want to take this occasion to talk to you about what that law means to every American. 188 years ago this week, a small band of valiant men began a long struggle for freedom. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, not only to found a nation, but to forge an ideal of freedom, not only for political independence, but for personal liberty, not only to eliminate foreign rule, but to establish the rule of justice in the affairs of men. That struggle was a turning point in our history. Today, in far corners of distant continents, the ideals of those American patriots still shape the struggles of men who hunger for freedom. This is a proud triumph. Yet those who founded our country knew that freedom would be secure only if each generation fought to renew and enlarge its meaning. From the Minutemen at Concord to the soldiers in Vietnam, each generation has been equal to that trust. Americans of every race and color have died in battle to protect our freedom. Americans of every race and color have worked to build a nation of widening opportunities. Now, our generation of Americans has been called on to continue the unending search for justice within our own borders. We believe that all men are created equal, yet many are denied equal treatment. We believe that all men have certain unalienable rights, yet many Americans do not enjoy those rights. We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty, yet millions are being deprived of those blessings, not because of their own failures, but because of the color of their skin. The reasons are deeply embedded in history and tradition and the nature of man.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and for those of you who are new to the show, the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where I find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. This show is part 4 of a 4-part series that I'm doing based on a book that you see right here and is up on the screen. It's called Black Reconstruction by W.E.B. Du Bois. And the reason I'm doing that because he wrote this book in 1935, but it was based on the history that he's talking about, the Reconstruction era. You can fast forward it to what's going on now, and you find that everything he's talking about and the patterns that he shows in this book and what he talks about the elite and the opportunity that we had to really come together as a country during that Reconstruction period, because the way I was told by when I was young going to school, it was that it was a disaster and black people were incompetent in some way. That narrative was a lie, and that's what he's saying in 1935. We're still hearing the same kind of pattern when you talk about DEI. It's kind of saying that wherever you have black people, they always screw up until white people come in. It's the same underlying nonsense. Okay, so for the last 3 shows, I started part 1 going through the area of Reconstruction. This third part, the previous one, before this one, I talked about some of the ramifications that happened afterwards, and we'll continue from that. I left off on the last one when the Rutherford B. Hayes Tilden betrayal of 1877. What are the agreements in order for Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican? And I also wanted to show that the Republican Party betrayed us back then. They betrayed us They were never our friends. For those of you who are today saying that the Republican Party freed the slaves, yeah, that was 1865. But after 1865, they turned their backs on us. I left it here showing an illustration that was in one of the news magazines of the time, illustration showing the Rutherford B. Hayes in 1877, based on the promise he made to the Confederates that to get the votes that he needed, the Electoral College votes, and he became president. And the first thing he did in that betrayal is to pull the troops that were protecting black people after the Civil War, during the period of time of the Reconstruction, that all the great things could have happened. But once those troops came out, that we were left hanging in the air to the KKK and all these other paramilitary troops, and the South did rise again. Let's go on to the next. Okay, and this is what happened after those troops left. They used, and this is the ex-Confederacy that started to gain power again, and they were not happy when these enslaved people were the senators and congressmen and judges and all the things that we were starting to do during that 12 years of Reconstruction. What did they do? The backlash again. They used paramilitary terror, lynching, ballot stuffing, poll tax, literacy tax, and violence to strip black citizens of their rights to vote, which is the 15th Amendment that came out during the Reconstruction era, to hold office, to serve on juries, to live without constant fear. We were doing those things for 12 years. We had an opportunity, and they snatched it away from us. Segregation laws, black clothes were not accidental. They were the legal codification of political choice. The choice to sacrifice black freedom for white power, white supremacy. So when you hear black people talk about white supremacy, we're talking about a deliberate period of time of white dominance. It was not coincidental, wasn't natural law. It was done by terror, okay? They were the Proud Boys and all these other groups that we still exist today, all right? Let's go on to the next. And what did the National Republican Party do as this horror unfolded? After 1877, it largely looked away. It allowed black Reconstruction governments to be crushed. It allowed black cities, counties, and towns to be terrorized, burned, and economically strangled. It allowed lynchings to become a national ritual without almost no federal intervention. Rutherford B. Hayes and all the Republicans after that did not do anything. My individuals might have done stuff best way they can, but the major party did that. Let's go on to the next. The same party that today MAGA Republicans claim we are the party that freed the slaves in 1865, by 1877 became in practice the party freed itself from the obligations to protect those former slaves and their descendants, and they never looked back. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, Dubois gave us a critical insight into what happened next. He argued that the defeat of Reconstruction was not just a tragedy for black people, it was a catastrophe for American democracy and for the entire working class, black and white. We had an opportunity to become one nation, but we became separate, two separate nations, separate but unequal. Let's go on to the next. When Reconstruction fell, black and white workers were deliberately set against each other. Sounds true? MAGA did the same thing in the 2024 election. The planters in the South and the captains of industries in the North learned that if they could build a caste system on race, if they could convince poor white workers that their whiteness mattered more than their wages, more than their solidarity, then they could rule unchallenged. And it's still working to this day. White Americans, majority of y'all, working against your own self-interest because of the color of your skin. Let's go on to the next. White supremacy became the wedge that split laboring classes and protected the power of capital. Du Bois called Jim Crow and the falsification of the Reconstruction the propaganda of history. Textbooks, movies, politicians, and preachers portrayed Reconstruction as a period of Negro misrule, claimed black people were unfit for citizenship, and portrayed the Ku Klux Klan as saviors. You know, Birth of a Nation was a movie that was shown at the White House in 1913. That was the DEI nonsense that we still heard in the last couple of years. This is 2026. You heard about DEI all through 2024 and 2025. All lies, but it worked to the white masses. Let's go on. This was no ignorance. It was a deliberate rewriting of history to justify a counter-revolution. What Dubois understood and what we must understand is that once a nation accepts lies about black freedom as its common sense, its politics will be shaped by those lies for generations. Look at what we're going through with the lies we're hearing in MAGA to this day, okay? Fake news and all that nonsense. This is nothing new. Black people have experienced it. That's why we tried to warn you in 2024. We had knowledge, historical memory of what we had to go through for hundreds of years. And again, you still ignored us. Let's go on to the next. White supremacist redeemist governments seized control across the South. Of course, they used lynching, terror, voter suppression, and rigid laws to strip black people of the vote, of office, of safety, and of land, and of life. We're going through the same nonsense right now with these voter suppression laws. What else is new? Again, white backlash, but it's always black people who are considered the danger to America. It's black men who consider the danger. But as you see the true history of America, who has always been the one who has been the danger to America's democracy? White males. Okay, this is the truth that Dr. Dubois was saying in 1935 in this book that I'm introducing you to. This is why they talked about DEI or don't want to talk about black history or pulling books off the shelves in the last couple of years, because the truth of American history. Where was America great when it comes to people of African descent, Native Americans, people of Asian descent? We had to deal with this reality. This is what America has not really want to face to this day. Let's go on to the next. Jim Crow didn't fall from the sky. It was built brick by brick, law by law, body by body on the ruins of abandoned Reconstruction. Let's go on. Du Bois' central insight is that this was not just a Southern tragedy or a black issue. He argued that the defeat of Reconstruction was a catastrophe for the American democracy itself. We're dealing with the ramifications today. When black freedom was sacrificed, the whole experiment in multiracial democracy was sabotaged. So this illness started back in 1877, not just in 2024, folks. 1877, and y'all are just waking up to this truth. So that means that you were asleep for this last century and a half. Let's go on to the next. When black freedom was sacrificed, the whole experiment in multiracial democracy was sabotaged. When black and white workers were turned against each other, the planters and the industrialists were given a free hand to rule. We still have it today with the elites who are pushing their agenda and manipulating the political arena. Okay, and the Republican Party is doing what they were doing back in the late 1800s. Let's go on to the next. White supremacy became the wedge that split the working class and protected the power of capital. And then the story shifts, but it never really changed. Okay, the story always, the lost cause, or black people can't do DEI today, whatever the story is, but it still really hasn't changed. The elite manipulating the majority white population to go against their own interests and try not to get any kind of cohesive unity between black and white workers who are suffering at the same level. Okay. All our pocketbooks are getting affected, whether you're black or white today, by the decisions made by those multi-billionaires today. Let's go on. There's nothing new back in the 1870s. By the early 20th century, the National Republican Party had retreated from any sustained fight against Jim Crow. It was increasingly a party of business interests, what else is new, willing to live with segregation at the way things are. Now, I'm not saying the Democrats were any better. Yes, they were still the Dixiecrats during this period of time. Then we had the Republican Party that was doing what they did. They were dealing with the people, the elites, you know, the Gilded Age folks, the railroad tycoons, and all those folks had their attention. The same business elite that is being manipulating the Republican Party to this day. Let's go on to the next. It kept the slogan of the Party of Lincoln, but it's abandoned the spirit of radical reconstruction. Let's go on to the next. The lily white turn and whitening the party. This is called the lily white movement that was in the Republican Party that went from the 1890s to the 1930s. Okay, to let you know that, you know, ignoring black people was nothing new for the Republican Party in the 1960s or 1970s. It goes back to the 1890s. Inside the party, the Lily White movement openly campaigned to purge black Republicans and make the GOP an all-white organization in the Jim Crow South, arguing that this is the only way to win white voters. Nixon did the exact same thing in the 1970s, folks. Let's go on to the next thing. The systematic black disenfranchisement, okay, the Lily White seed. Okay, in 1890 to 1908, southern states systematically rewrote the Constitution to impose poll tax, and that's when we got the literacy tax and the grandfather clause. And the Supreme Court, the Plessy versus Ferguson decision in 1896, which constitutionalized separate but equal. That's why we needed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Okay, because of this constitutional bill. We black folks didn't do that, but white America, you did it, and you got to fix it today. Let's go on to the next. Okay, I'm going to go through not all of them, but I want you to see all these different during this period of time when black people talked about. Well, we are told that black people are the danger to America because we're violent. Look, who are the violent ones that we had to deal with? Make America great again, right? You got all these, got massacres that happened to black people, to black towns. You had Hamburg, South Carolina, Danville, Virginia, Vicksburg, Mississippi, Wilmington, North Carolina, 1898. White supremacists overthrew elected by government. Okay, you think January 6th was something new? It's been going on in black communities, in black life, in black America for generation after generation after generation. Okay, let's go on to the next. Okay, it continues. You got Atlanta, Georgia. There was a massacre in 1906. Springfield, Illinois. There was a race riot in 1908. Shocked some liberal whites so much that they actually founded the NAACP. NAACP was founded because of that riot in 1908 in Springfield. You got Forsyth County, Georgia, expulsion of black people. When you got people, white mob coming to your house and telling you what would happen if you got told today to get out, take whatever you can, leaving all your furniture, all your savings, and get to the next train station and leave. This is what white people have been doing to black people for generations and generations and generations. Let's go on. Okay, East St. Louis in 1917. Houston, Texas. Even black soldiers did not had to deal with these white supremacists. Okay, they were, you know, I think it was a movie and a play based on what happened at Camp Logan in 1917. Washington, D.C., the Red Summer of riots in 1919, and on and on and on. Let's go on to the next. Okay, you got Chicago, Knoxville, Omaha, Nebraska. So you think Elaine, Arkansas. Let's go on. Okay, you think Tulsa, Oklahoma was the only one y'all know of? Look at all the ones prior to that. Massacre in 1921. Most of y'all know you got Okasee in Florida, just because of an election day massacre. Let's go on. Rosewood, Florida, Colfax, and surrounding Louisiana prior all the way back in 1873, one of the bloodiest massacres that you on the books. Violence and legal manipulation ensured black land and political rights were crushed, feeding into the larger pattern documented by Jim Crow violence later on, those previous ones. Let's go on to the next. Yet not only did you have these white violent mob burning and looting and taking the lands of black people, you had these sundown towns. And anybody are not familiar with sundown towns, these were towns throughout the America that said, black folks, you got to be out of town before the sun goes down. Otherwise, something bad would happen to you. Okay? It got so bad that we had to have only what you call a green book, which was a map. So if you want to travel from, say, New York to California, you had to have a special map as a black person to avoid these sundown towns if you're traveling by car or by bus, so that you'll know that you will not get lynched, murdered, beat up, or terrorized somewhere. This was the America we have to deal with. This is the America that goes against the land of the free and the home of the brave that you're constantly being told. That's the illusion. That's white America's illusion. Time to wake up. We've been through what you're seeing happening now over and over again. That's why we tried to warn you in 2024. We know, we recognize white supremacists when they're in power. When they were in power in the past, this is what they've done to us. Now they're doing to those other immigrants, brown people who tried to be white-facing, ignoring the Latinos who voted against their own interests. We understood what was going on, and you did not listen in 2024. Let's go on to the next. Because the record is scattered, historians now count at least 50 documented expulsions of black communities and many more race massacres and neighborhood destruction under Jim Crow, all of which systematically stripped black people of land, homes, businesses, and political power. This is why we talk about reparations. Let's go on to the next. National Republicans focused on business tariffs and industrial growth, not black rights. See, tariffs before? Anti-lynching efforts failed in Congress. Federal government refused to consistently protect black communities. We didn't have but we've still been loyal to America, okay? But we're the violent ones. We're the ones that you can't trust. We're the ones that, no, only thing we tried to do was build, and build. But who destroyed? Who scattered? Let's go on to the next. The second Reconstruction period, that's what the Civil Rights era was considered, 1954 to 1968. Tried it again. Legal cracks in Jim Crow, 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education. Black grassroots organizing accelerates boycotts, sit-ins, freedom rides, mass voter registration. We've always, and during those periods of times when we were getting massacred and slaughtered and lynched, we always had black grassroots organizing. We were never quiet. We were never humble. We fought all through that. That's why we have our Black History Month, to recognize those black heroes that stood up during the 1920s and during the red summers, during the latter part of the 1800s, when we didn't have no help from both the Republicans or the Democratic Party, but we had black grassroots organizing. So we knew what we were up against, and we always fought it. Let's go on to the next. The landmark civil rights legislation. In the beginning of this show, you heard the speech by Lyndon Johnson on the day on July 2nd, 1964. That speech was what he said earlier in the day before he signed this 1964 Civil Rights Act, which outlawed discrimination in public. His words were pretty, but we still had to deal with those segregationists in the South who didn't listen to those words. In 1965, you had the Voting Rights Act. In 1968, you had the Fair Housing Act, and MAGA today is trying to revoke all those. If you don't wake up, if those things go, then what right do you have as citizens? If they get rid of the birthright citizens of the 14th Amendment, you would not be called a citizen, because it was meant for black people. Enslaved people became citizens. Those who were born enslavement, that's what it was meant by birthright, okay? And others benefited from them, okay? There was a Chinese gentleman who took it to court in the latter part of I think in the 1880s, where it became expanded to all other immigrants. But it was first established for black people. Let's go on to the next. The federal government, under pressure from black movement, partially revived the spirit of Reconstruction in the 1960s. But for 60 years, the white conservative movement, the Heritage Foundation that wrote Project 2025 has always fought against it. No different than the Redeemer movement of the 1870s of ex-Confederates who did not agree with the results of the Civil War. Okay? There was still a white backlash who did not agree with the results of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, and Fair Housing Act, and other types of civil expansion of this Constitution. Let's go on to the next. Now, this is the part that a lot of people get confused when they talk about Republicans or the party of Lincoln. And then after the 1964 Civil Rights Act happened, was signed by Johnson, he said when he signed it, we lost the South. And Goldwater was running for president against Johnson at that time. Okay? Barry Goldwater opposed the Civil Rights Act, invoking states' rights, which is another trope for, the Confederacy, states' rights, and limited government. Many white segregationists, Dixiecrats, who were in the Democratic Party, began migrating into the Republican Party. The Republican Party ignored black folks, but they accepted the John Birch folks, and they had the Lily White League, so they were still pro-white. The D-Start started shifting from Democrat to the Republican for the first time since Reconstruction. That's why you have the South predominantly Republican and predominantly white. Let's go on. It was because of Goldwater that they switched. The Dixiecrats, the Confederates, moved to the Republican Party, and they've been going against black folks. In the late 60s, Richard Nixon campaigned deliberately to court white Southerners and suburban resentment against civil disorder. It was called the Southern Strategy. The Southern Strategy by Nixon in the 1970s was to ignore the black vote and focus only on Southern whites. Okay, you had the silent majority coded racial appeals. The party that once fought the Redeemers now can consciously absorb their voters and their logic. That's the Republican Party. I want you to understand that. Okay? So those of you who are stupid enough and foolish enough to say that the Republican Party freed the slaves, which makes it all right, that's why you voted for the MAGA people in 2024, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know your history. Let's go on to the next. In 1980, Ronald Reagan, the great Ronald Reagan, opened his general election campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi. If you don't know what Philadelphia, Mississippi is when those three freedom riders, the brother and the two white kids, were murdered. They were murdered in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Bailey, Goodman, and Schwerin, I think. Okay, Policy Gut Social Program. This is Ronald Reagan. Civil rights enforcement is weakened. Ronald Reagan, the Republicans. Let's go on. Okay. Racial inequality maintained by new means. Mass incarceration. Republicans. Obama backlash. Started the MAGA movement, basically, the Tea Party movement. Let's go on, real quick. Tea Party movement. Birtherism. Donald Trump weaponized birtherism. MAGA became the explicit vehicle for the nostalgia, the South might rise again. And I'm going to leave that here. So I want you to understand that history, if you want to understand the present, you must understand the precedent, what came before. So if you call yourself a Republican, that's who you are. If you voted Republican, that's who you voted for. So I'm going to stop right here. I hope you understand. Peace. Hotep. Bye-bye.